Today we're diving into another dark chapter from Putin's rise to power, a story that helped him tighten his grip on Russia from the very beginning. Enjoy the watch.
In September 1999, buildings began exploding across Russia: Volgodonsk, Buynaksk, Moscow. In some cases, there were trucks loaded with tons of explosives parked next to apartment blocks. In Moscow, sacks were simply placed in the basement, with a timer set for the nighttime. A wave of terror began, unlike anything Russia had ever experienced. It was precisely in September 1999 that the word hexagen, RDX, became widely known in Russia. Until then, it was familiar only to demolition experts.
По некоторой информации, в подвале дома номер 8 обнаружены 2 ящика со взрывчатым веществом гексогеном.
Накануне на месте взрыва были обнаружены фрагменты взрывного устройства и взрывчатые вещества – гексоген и тротил.
Появилось сообщение о том, что в школе, находящейся в этом же дворе, обнаружены ящики с взрывчатым веществом гексогеном.
Hexagen is a highly powerful explosive, resembling granulated sugar in appearance. It is not used in its pure form. It's too dangerous. It's only applied as an additive to other explosives, for example, to TNT. TNT can come in solid blocks or in loose, powder form. The latter is called flaked TNT, and it looks like fine vermicelli, yellowish flakes. It was exactly this mix, TNT combined with hexagen, that made up the so-called Moscow mixture, used to blow up the buildings on Guryanova Street and Kashirskoye Highway in September 1999. Sugar and vermicelli. Chechens were blamed for the bombings of the buildings. And in that very same September of 1999, the Second Chechen War began. Putin, until then a completely unknown KGB man from gangster Petersburg, was already heading into the elections as a military commander and the savior of the country from Chechen terror.
Это преступление, причем преступление гнусное. Совершенно очевидно, что это террористический акт. Трудно назвать этих людей людьми. Их даже зверями назвать нельзя. Если это звери, то бешеные. Это вызов уже не государству, это вызов народу. И поэтому ответ должен быть соответствующий. Он должен быть сверхжестким.
Мы с вами не имеем права позволить ни секунды слабости себе. Ни секунды. Потому что если мы это сделаем, то тогда те, кто погиб, тогда получается, что они погибли напрасно. Поэтому я предлагаю сегодня эту супинку поставить. Мы обязательно выпьем за них. Обязательно. Но пить будем потом. Потом, тогда, когда эти задачи принципиального характера, вы о них все знаете, будут решены.
The sinister building explosions caused real panic. In September 1999, people in Moscow began taking night shifts in their apartment stairwells. They searched basements and attics themselves. Traffic police would literally pounce on any passing Gazelle van. Rumors spread that sacks were being delivered in Gazelles to the bombing sites. TV kept showing police sketches of some men from the Caucasus who were supposedly about to be caught, but somehow they always slipped away. Back then, everyone heard about Achimez Gachiev, the man who allegedly delivered sacks of sugar to the buildings. And then, as if the earth swallowed him whole, he disappeared and has never been found to this day.
У меня просьба ко всем предпринимателям или квартиросъемщикам, которые сдавали это тому гражданину помещение, срочно сообщить в органы внутренних дел. Не исключено, что он может где-то находиться, и мы сейчас проводим его розыск.
ГУВД столицы обращается ко всем жителям города и в первую очередь предпринимателям со следующим обращением. Если в последнее время этот человек снимал офис или помещение под склад, немедленно позвоните в милицию, чтобы, возможно, предотвратить новую трагедию. И подобная информация уже поступает в органы внутренних дел. Мужчину, приметы которого совпадают с составленным фотороботом, в минувшие четверг и воскресенье видели жильцы одного из домов на улице Народного ополчения.
The bombing nightmare stopped suddenly and without warning. It happened in Ryazan on the evening of September 22, 1999. A local resident, bus driver Alexei Kartoffelnikov, came home late from work and noticed unfamiliar people carrying some sacks into the basement. Just in case, he called the police. What followed unfolded rapidly. In the basement, police discovered 3 sacks of loose material, a timer, and a detonator. Later, on air with NTV, Kartoffelnikov described the contents of the sacks as some kind of granules, mostly resembling finely chopped yellowish vermicelli.
Я эти видел мешки буквально в 3 метрах, когда они лежали. Они напоминали, я не знаю, может, не гексогены, что там такое. Было желтоватого цвета, во-первых. И такой вот мелкий, как, скажем, вермишель, такой вот порез, какие-то вот такие гранулы, так будем называть. Вот я отсюда сейчас вижу, там, ну как, мука отсюда видно, мука. Вот там что-то такое были какие-то гранулы желтоватого цвета.
Vermicelli! That's exactly what flaked, pulverized TNT looks like. And the granules? Those were much closer to hexogen. Within 15 minutes, bomb technicians, emergency responders, FSB agents, and high-ranking officials from the local police department rushed to the scene. A gas analyzer confirmed the presence of hexogen vapors. Was the Moscow mixture here too? Residents were evacuated from their apartments in a matter of minutes, some in their nightgowns. Every local agency, including the Ryazan branch of the FSB, treated the situation as an attempted terrorist attack. The news spread across the entire country. TV broadcast composite sketches of the suspects. Every major Russian television channel reported that a residential bombing in Ryazan had been prevented. By the morning of September 23, 1999, the press office of the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs officially confirmed. Explosives based on hexogen had been found in Ryazan. The city was in full lockdown. All entrances and exits were sealed. They were searching for 3 terrorists, 2 men and 1 woman. And they were found on the 3rd day. The rented apartment where they were hiding had been located. An arrest was being prepared. But according to other reports, they were already detained by September 24. And then, around noon on September 24, Nikolai Patrushev appeared on national television, Putin's old buddy from St. Petersburg, and at the time, director of the FSB. To say it was a shock would be an understatement. Patrushev announced that the terrorists in Ryazan were in fact FSB officers, that it was a training exercise to test vigilance. And the sacks? They didn't contain hexogen, they contained sugar.
Это не был взрыв, во-первых. Во-вторых, не предотвращен, и думаю, что не совсем четко сработали. Это было учение, там был сахар. Взрывчатого вещества не было.
Patrushev's story about FSB training exercises raised, to put it mildly, serious doubts, even back then. According to his version, the FSB had conducted a training drill in a residential neighborhood, and no one had been informed. Dozens of people spent the night outside in the cold. A real, not simulated, criminal case under terrorism charges had already been opened. And, in fact, Patrushev only mentioned the training after the operatives had been discovered by local Ryazan cops and FSB officers who themselves had no idea any drill was taking place.
У нас 3-летний ребенок. Мы его вытащили из ванны, распаренного ребенка, закутали в тряпье и бежали, сломя голову. Ребенок у нас до сих пор болеет.
А вы сейчас верите, что это были учения?
Нет.
А почему?
Не верю, потому что все было очень правдоподобно. Мы все видели. Из подвала крысы бежали. Крысы бегут обычно с тонущего корабля.
Кто вам дал право, если вы говорите учение, кто вам дал право издеваться над нами? Кто? Вот у меня жена после этого слегла в больницу. Кто вам дал право? Вам и всем вашим сотрудникам. Кто вам дал право?
Конечно, при проведении учений это почти святое правило. Не надо к ним привлекать людей, которые не должны участвовать в учениях. Вот жители дома в данном случае, конечно, не были объектом проведения учений. Давайте мы исходить будем из факта, о котором нам сказали, что в мешках был сахар. И выясняется, что ни эксперты ФСБ, ни эксперты МВД сходу не могут понять, что перед ними сахар. Так что ли? Вот, у меня возникает ощущение какого-то абсурда. И мне бы хотелось задать вопрос следователю. Вы проводили, скажем, опрос свидетелей на предмет установления факта, что это тот же материал, который они видели на месте взрыва? Вот тут говорят о том, что был какой-то желтый, типа там сеченый вермишели, а у вас сахар. Насколько я понимаю, немножко различаются они.
Я хочу сказать, сахар производства Курской области, сахар производства Воронежской области, цвет имеет другой, а сахар, который производят у нас на Кубе, вы получаете, он вообще желтый.
The FSB was asked for specifics, to provide the training plan, the official order for its execution, the names of the 3 operatives, and so on. The first attempt to give at least some explanation of the incident was made by the FSB only 6 months later, on March 22, 2000. On that day, a press conference was held in Moscow with veterans from the Alpha and Wimpel units. And there he was, this character, the former commander of the Alpha Special Forces Unit, General Gennady Zaitsev. Here he is, during his time in service. And here, with Putin in the Kremlin in 1999. In another photo, he can be seen with gangsters from the Podolsk organized crime group, which was under the protection of FSB Special Forces. In short, a distinguished veteran of state security. And so, at the press conference on March 22, 2000, he stated that the Ryazan Sugar drill was conducted by a special FSB group from Moscow, with the participation of people from the Wimpel unit, professional saboteurs. The special group went to Ryazan that same day, September 22, 1999, closer to the evening. They bought a hunting cartridge in a store called Kolchuga to make a dummy detonator, and 3 sacks of sugar at the local market.
На основании распоряжения руководства Федеральной службы безопасности, в соответствии с планом проведения первого этапа операции «Вихрь антитеррор», группа была поставлена задача выехать в город Рязань для проведения данных мероприятий, что и было сделано. Закупить сахарный песок, собрать, имитатор взрывного устройства.
The ill-fated granulated sugar, later called hexogen by some media outlets, was purchased by the special group at the local market,
said Zaitsev. He explained the presence of hexogen vapors in the basement by saying that the experts had violated basic procedures and used contaminated equipment, devices that still had explosive residue left over from a previous analysis. In other words, they had apparently been working with hexogen the day before. Interesting. Where exactly? And had simply forgotten to wipe the device clean. These are the kinds of fascinating stories General Zaitsev added to the ones told by General Patrushev. General Zaitsev, who spent his entire life in the KGB, surely knew the old rule. A cover story must be unverifiable. And if it's not, you use a different one. But somehow, the stories of Comrade Zaitsev and Comrade Patrushev just don't add up. Here he is, that very same expert, Yuri Tkachenko, on the right, the head of the engineering and technical division of the local police, who responded to the Ryazan call. A week after the sugar incident, Tkachenko was officially commended for bravery in the line of duty. 6 months later, the story about the dirty equipment emerged, but no one could explain where or when it had supposedly been contaminated with hexogen. And a year later, in 2001, Tkachenko was made to publicly state that he had not used any gas analyzer during the examination. He identified it by smell. Apparently, first the device was dirty, then there was no device at all. Now, a separate question about the sacks of sugar supposedly bought by the FSB operatives, if, of course, we're to believe General Zaitsev. If you remember, it was the local resident Alexei Kartofelnikov, the man who called the police, who described the contents of the sacks on NTV on March 24, 2000, as mostly yellowish vermicelli.
Они напоминали, я не знаю, может, не гексогены, что там такое. Было желтоватого цвета, во-первых. И такой вот мелкий-мелкий, как скажем, вермишель, такой вот порез, какие-то вот такие гранулы.
Zaitsev gave his press conference 2 days earlier, on March 22nd, and of course he didn't know that, so he simply repeated Patrushev's version about sacks of sugar. So what did the FSB operatives actually buy at the market? Vermicelli or sugar? Or is it that FSB special forces can't tell sugar from vermicelli? And if it was a mix, where did they blend it? In the Zhiguli they rolled up in on Novoselov Street? Or maybe right there at the market stall? In short, as Berezovsky, the Grey Cardinal under Yeltsin, once said,
«Он закончится, его повесят на рее».
Вы тогда сказали?
В 2000 году. Его повесят на рее. Но меня повесят, видимо, перед ним, потому что скажут, что ты его привел. И я от этого никогда не отмажусь.
It's a pity that realization came to him too late.
Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you enjoy these kinds of deep dive videos. There's still a lot of untold material about Putin's real rise to power that hasn't made it into the English-speaking YouTube space. Thanks as well to everyone who supports this channel through Buy Me a Coffee. Every bit goes straight into making more content. And a huge thank you to all of you on Patreon. I'll never stop saying it. This project exists because of you. Not saying goodbye. See you soon.